Hey guys, tonight we step into a world where rivers of fire bury beasts alive, clouding the sky with ash and sealing their fate in an instant. Imagine standing on a trembling slope, the earth roaring like a furious beast as glowing pyroclastic flows surge downhill, hotter than boiling oil and faster than a galloping horse. You probably won't survive this heated welcome, but don't worry. Everyone else has paid their admission in full. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments so we know where in the world you're about to witness this spectacle. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through a blanket of ash, each footstep sinking into silvery powder that crunches like gravel under your boots. The air tastes of sulfur and embers, a stinging reminder that the earth itself can turn against you. Here in places like Pompeii's prehistoric analogues, entire herds of giant mammoths and armored titanotheres. Creatures the size of school buses were engulfed by pyroclastic surges, rushing at speeds surpassing 100 miles an hour. Historians still argue whether these flows cooled enough for some animals to survive briefly before succumbing. But the fossil record leaves little doubt. Most inhaled superheated gases and fell lifeless where they stood. A mainstream historical fact, pyroclastic flows result from explosive volcanic eruptions ejecting gas and ash that collapse under their own weight, traveling faster than lava and obliterating everything in their path. Fringe lore whispers that some ancient tribes believed these glowing rivers were the breath of angry gods. So they left offerings at the volcano's base, whether charred cattle remains or jeweled headdresses, ritual or not. No gift appeased the mountain. You might wonder if any ritual ever saved a single tusked giant. Scholars still debate the efficacy of sacrificial appeasement versus geological inevitability. The heat ripples across the landscape, waves of white-hot air warping the fog-hazed horizon. You lift your arm to shield your face as a miniature hail of pumice glistening like frozen tears pummels your shoulders, each flake cracking against your gambeson. Joke one, I always wanted a spa treatment, but this exfoliation might be a bit too intense for my taste. Behind the pumice rain, you spot an elephant-sized skeleton, half buried, its ribs splayed open like a broken fan. The ash around it has hardened into a glassy crust, preserving the posture of its final moments for eternity. You drop to your knees, brushing aside ash to reveal fur still matted with grime, the creature's trunk curled in a lifelike grasp. Fringe rumor suggests that natural gases sometimes allowed victims to suffocate more slowly, their bodies warmed enough to mummify rather than carbonize outright. Historians still argue whether some carcasses beneath ash were preserved by rapid cooling or by chemical reactions that inhibited decay, but what's certain is that these animals stand frozen in time, both a scientific treasure and a somber monument to nature's fury. Your breath hitches as you lean closer, inhaling the acrid perfume of embers and burnt vegetation. The surrounding plain is littered with similar silhouettes, colossal beasts crumpled like discarded drapery trunks and tusks protruding from ash drifts. Modern asides flicker, Imagine OSHA issuing a volcanic hazard alert and handing out flame-retardant suits complete with lava-safe pro badges. But here, your only armor is grit and a bit of luck. You smirk. Talk about a red-hot job, literally. Rising, you scan the ashen expanse for survivors. None move. The once thundering herds that grazed these plains now lie silent, their life stories encoded in twisted bone. A mainstream fact asserts that volcanic ash can preserve organic material by excluding oxygen and moisture, effectively flash freezing the scene. Historians still argue whether catastrophic eruptions favored certain ecosystems over others. Did predators shadow the ash clouds for easy scavenging, or did the heat drive scavengers away? Whatever the case, scavenging dinosaurs would have found this banquet too deadly to sample. The ground trembles again, a distant tremor signaling the volcano's restless heart. You step back boots sliding in ash and feel the earth's pulse doomward. Flames dance atop fumarole's vents, exhaling molten breath into the air. Fringe lore says that shamans listen to these hisses as the mountain's voice interpreting crackles as warnings or prophecies. Whether their divinations ever saved anyone remains hotly debated, but you might give them credit for reading the signs. Just ahead, a herd of bison disturbed by earlier tremors huddles at a safe distance, their brindled hides dusted and gray. You watch them paw at the earth, nostrils, flaring eyes wide. Joke 2. I always thought bison were too big to fit under my car, clearly. Never considered ashfall. The herd's uneasy snorting mingles with the wind, a lullaby of anxiety. As the ash plume pulses overhead, you take one last look at the fossilized silhouettes frozen in mid-stride. Each twisted limb and gaping maw tells a story of sudden doom of heat, so fierce it welded lungs and shattered bone. You turn away ash, drifting in your wake, knowing these plains will sleep beneath dust for millennia before scientists unearth their silent testimony. You trudge back toward sheltered valleys, the taste of sulfur lingering on your tongue. In your mind, the image of that great beast's electric eyes forever closed shimmers like a cautionary tale. Nature's wrath waits patiently beneath its silent veil, ready to snuff out life in an instant. You breathe deep, letting the wind carry away embers of dread. You slip into a shallow sinkhole where the earth smells of oil and swamp, a slick, glassy sheen covering your boots as you step onto the tar pit's edge. Dawn mists swirl around you, turning the trees into silver sentinels whose branches drip with condensation. As a prehistoric tar pit scavenger, your task is grim push-aside floating debris to retrieve the bodies of creatures that sank into this viscous trap and never escaped. A mainstream fact, natural asphalt seeps like those at La Brea in California have trapped animals for tens of thousands of years, preserving bones in remarkable detail. Carnivores drawn to struggling prey often became victims themselves. Historians still argue whether predators such as dire wolves deliberately hunted near these traps or were simply lured by the scent of trapped herbivores. But the skeletal jumbles leave no doubt that hunger and curiosity proved fatal. You wade in cautiously leather boots, sucking with every step. Your lungs fill with a heady mix of kerosene tang and rotting flesh. Fringe lore claims that some scavengers wore belts of burnt cattail roots To mask the stench, believing the charred fibers absorbed odors like petrified sponges. Whether those belts ever worked or just turned everyone into walking torches remains a smoldering question. You slip a length of cattail into your satchel, smoothing its blackened surface. A cold breeze ripples the tar's surface, sending ripples that catch the sunrise's copper glow. Joke one whispers in your mind, I always wanted to make a splash in my career, just didn't expect it to be this sticky. You lean on a stout oar repurposed from driftwood, prying a half-submerged mammoth tusk free of its gooey grave. The tar pulls back with a wet pop, revealing ivory crowned in black wax. Below you, a dire wolf skeleton lies sprawled as though mid-lunged jaws still gaping. You kneel and brush away the glossy film with stiff bristled brush. Each bone gleams like polished bone china. A subtle hiss escapes the pit steps, bubbles rising from warm asphalt vents. The chorus of taps and oozes surround you like whispered secrets from the earth's core. A modern aside cavorts at the edge of your mind. Imagine a health inspector shouting, "No heavy metals in your morning latte," before you plunge into this chemical stew. Yet here you are savoring the thrill of discovery over clean coffee. Joke two. I'd say it's time to clean up my act. But this place scoffs at soap and water. You heft the tusk onto a plank laid across the pit's lip, your makeshift outrigger. The wood groans under its weight and slicks with tar. Each movement risks plunging your tools into the black abyss. A mainstream fact surfaces: asphalt's preservative properties stem from its ability to exclude water and oxygen, halting decay, which is why so many Ice Age specimens emerge in near-perfect condition. Historians still argue whether prehistoric humans raided these pits for fresh meat or avoided them due to superstition. But cut marks on some bones suggest early butchers dared to dine on trapped beasts. You study the tusk's spiral, a fingerprint of ancient growth. Beneath it, you spot a sloth's claw tipped in obsidian-hard keratin. You pry it free with careful leverage, feeling the slick resistance under your fingertips. Fringe rumor suggests that collecting these claws brought good luck on migratory hunts, their curved shapes believed to trap evil spirits. You tuck the claw into your belt pouch, imagining it warding off both spirits and sticky situations. The pit's surface shifts beneath your boots. You take a step back, but the tar grips your sole, pulling at your leather. You yank free, boots squelching, and send a plume of sticky droplets arcing like miniature fireworks. The smell of hot pitch warms the morning air as a chorus of birds calls from distant marshes, uncaring witnesses to your work. Your fingers quiver from cold and effort. You press your palm to your mouth to catch your breath. Historians still argue whether the weight of trapped animals ever generated enough buoyant pressure to force victims back to the surface briefly, or if every soul sank inexorably out of reach. Here you watch the tar's surface smooth over once disturbed contours, concealing evidence as if the earth sighs and forgets. You rise, shoulders aching, and cross a board to reach a cluster of smaller bones, rodent jaws, and turtle shells snapped in half. With tongs fashioned from yew wood, you lift each fragment, careful not to crush it. The pit chuckles its approval, bubbling and hissing at your intrusion. Joke 3. They said digging for fossils would be thrilling. I didn't realize it'd be like wrestling jelly. By midday, the sun climbs high and the smell intensifies. You pause to wipe tar from your brow, tasting its bitterness against the sweat on your lips. Fellow workers pause at the pit's rim smoking rolled reeds to stave off nausea. You refuse the offer, preferring a gulp of cool spring water from a horn cup. You gather tusks, claws, and vertebrae on a flat board, each piece gleaming black and white like exotic chess pieces. The array reflects the morning light, a macabre still life of Ice Age denizens. A mainstream fact reminds you that many of these specimens now form the backbone of natural history collections, teaching us about extinct fauna and ecosystem dynamics. Yet historians still argue whether excavation methods of the Victorian era damaged invaluable context, sacrificing scientific integrity for display. Your haul completes you back away from the edge and lay each find on linen cloths in your wagon. The asphalt bubbles and cools beneath a late morning breeze. You scrape the final residue from your tools on a wooden block, the tar flaking off in jagged ribbons. You glance back at the pit's mirror surface, still silent, hungry for the next story. Climbing into your cart, you settle onto burlap sacks, the weight of discoveries pressing into your spine. The horses strain forward, and the wagon wheels rumble over the sodden ground. You breathe deep, tasting salt and oil on the wind, carrying with you the echoes of entombed giants and cunning predators alike. As you rattle toward camp, you tuck the carved boot charm and sloth claw into a leather chest, offering thanks to the tar's grim preserve. Each artifact a testament to a prehistoric death you lived to tell. The pit recedes behind you, its secrets bubbling quietly in the dawn's haze, waiting for the next curious soul brave enough to uncover them. You traverse a wind-swept plain, dotted with cracked earth and tufts of drought-tolerant grasses, but beneath your boots lies a hidden peril, sudden sinkholes shaped like yawning maws in the land. As a prehistoric settler's guide, your feet have memorized the faint dip and hollow echo under each step, yet even you can't predict the precise moment the ground gives way. Today, you witness the earth's betrayal as neighbors are swallowed in an instant, leaving only echoes in the rocky cavern below. The sky is a stark indigo, pin-pricked by morning stars when the first tremor ripples through the soil like a warning drum. A mainstream fact emerges in karst landscapes where soluble limestone underlies the surface sinkholes form when acidic rainwater dissolves rock, creating underground caverns that eventually collapse, sometimes catastrophically. Historians still argue whether prehistoric humans recognized these patterns well enough to avoid settling on unstable ground, or if entire villages vanished without warning, leaving only fractured foundations and whispered legends. You trudge along a narrow ledge when the ground shudders. Joke 1 flits through your mind. I always said I wanted to fall for you. Didn't mean literally. Seconds later, a neighbor's hut vanishes as a crater opens, walls collapsing in a thunderous roar. You leap back, leather sandals skidding in loam, and watch dust plume skyward. The rim quakes. A second collapse begins, and you dive behind a jagged boulder. Gorge below yawns in shadow, its depths unreachable in darkness. Fringe lore insists that ancient shamans carried ropes of woven grasses to lower rescuers into sinkholes, believing the earth spirits favored humble materials over iron. Whether any rescue ever succeeded remains debated, but you tuck a braid of grass into your belt, a small nod to tradition, in case the day requires descent. Rising on trembling legs, you edge toward the opening. Peering in, you glimpse splintered wood beams and broken pottery, abandoned possessions swept into the void. You spot a flint blade glinting from a ledge. Without hesitation, you tie a loop at the end of your sturdy leather cord and lower yourself waist deep, securing the loop around the blade to pull it free. The cavern's walls gleam with moisture, dripping onto stalagmite spires that dot the pit floor like frozen sentinels. A mainstream fact resurfaces: sinkholes have preserved archaeological treasures by burying wooden artifacts and human remains in anaerobic conditions, much like peat bogs. Historians still argue whether the rare organic finds are accidental time capsules or evidence of deliberate offering pits. But each discovery offers a glimpse into long-lost daily lives. Climbing out, you cradle the twisted blade in your calloused palm. Its flint edge, chipped in a precise curve, tells of skilled craftsmanship. You brush away the dust and slip it into your satchel. The rising sun casts golden rays into the cavern, illuminating dust motes in a silent ballet. You step back from the edge, heart pounding, and kneel to draw chalk lines marking the sinkhole's new perimeter. These guidelines will warn future travelers. Fringe detail notes some communities painted symbols on stones to signal danger, triangles for traps and spirals for shifting earth, but you prefer simple lines for their stark clarity. Historians still argue whether visual warning succeeded in curbing accidents or merely served as omens, but the lines lay bare the collapse's footprint. Surveying the scene, you gather broken shards, bell-shaped clay fragments that once formed cooking pots. Each piece you retrieve is a puzzle clue. You rinse them in a nearby spring, watching water bead off painted pigments. The patterns a band of teal arches suggest trade with distant tribes, illuminating prehistoric trade routes, even as the land betrayed its inhabitants. As the sun climbs, the sinkhole's edges shimmer with heat, and you feel the valley's hush pressed around you. No cries for help, those were swallowed along with the earth. You rise shoulders stiff and cast one last glance into the dark chasm. Your boots carry chalk lines and salvaged artifacts, flint blade pottery shards, and a braid of grass, evidence that even when the earth devours life's traces, endure. You walk away, the sinkhole's jagged rim retreating in your vision. Behind you, the plain stretches under a sapphire sky, indifferent to yesterday's catastrophe. The blade's weight in your satchel feels heavier than any rock. Each artifact preserved by collapse is a voice speaking across millennia, reminding you of mortality's fragility. A final joke echoes. I guess you can say that place really fell for me. You smirk at the pun despite yourself, the sound swallowed by the plain's quiet. Ahead lies the next challenge, storms, beasts, or maybe volcanic ash. But for now you carry the hollow echo of collapse and the promise that even a sinking world leaves traces for those brave enough to gather them. You crouch at the edge of a shimmering oasis, the midday sun shimmering off golden dunes in every direction, and feel the hairs on your neck prickle with foreboding. Your leather sandals sink into the warm sand as you lift a clay water jug to sip only to slam it shut, when a faint scratching erupts from beneath the reeds. Tonight's assignment as a desert guide involves more than thirst. You must lead travelers through a scorpion-infested marsh where venomous arthropods lurk beneath every blade. A mainstream fact. In the Triassic and Jurassic periods, ancient deserts and wetlands teemed with giant scorpions, some as large as modern house cats, that thrived in humid microclimates near water sources, their venom delivering painful incapacitation rather than immediate death. Historians still argue whether these prehistoric scorpions hunted in packs or were solitary predators. But fossilized trackways hint at coordinated movement among some species. You set the jug aside and step carefully between swaying reeds, sandals crunching on pulverized shells underfoot. Fringe lore claims that nomadic tribes once wore anklets of spun camel hair to muffle the scuttling of claws, hoping to sneak past scorpion hives. Whether the hair really dulled footsteps or simply unraveled in the heat remains a point of heated debate. You tuck a small coil of dried camel hair into your sash just in case stealth becomes your only hope. The air is stifling thick with the scent of brine and rot as the marsh's stagnant water laps at your ankles. You scan the mud for the first telltale sign, tiny pockmarks where a scorpion's tail has broken the surface. Joke one bubbles to your lips. I always wanted to find hidden treasure, but I didn't expect it'd be a stingy surprise. A sudden flurry of movement ripples across the mud flats. Hundreds of ebony forms emerge, pincers raised like rhythmic semaphore flags, tails arched in warning. Scorpions of every size converge into a shifting mass, some the length of your forearm, others as small as thumb knuckles, breathing in unison as if the entire pit pulses with life. You swallow hard, the desert's heat, suddenly secondary to the swarm that advances faster than any predator you've known. You raise a wooden staff tipped with iron, tapping it twice on the ground in a careful pattern your elders taught you, a signal for keep back. Some scorpions hesitate, lifting their claws as if confused. Others, emboldened by numbers, scuttle onto nearby reeds, their pincers clicking. A mainstream fact surfaces: scorpions use substrate vibrations to communicate and coordinate hunting, sensing prey through subtle tremors. Historians still argue whether these signals support true social behavior or are mere byproducts of foraging. You wonder if this swarm follows a leader, or if each creature simply heeds the vibrations of its neighbor. With a deep breath, you take a step backward, staff, tapping again once, twice, thrice. The swarm pauses, then recedes into the reeds, leaving a shifting tide of limbs and segmented carapaces. You exhale, muscles still coiled from the adrenaline. Joke 2. Who knew silence was the best weapon? I prefer it over the sound of screaming. Pressing on, you guide your party across the treacherous flats, each step measured, eyes locked on the ground. The water's edge glimmers with slime, and you point to flattened reeds marking old nests. Avoid those, you murmur. Your companions nod, faces pale but resolute, trusting your desert-honed instincts. Halfway across, a sudden crack echoes through the reeds, a snapping stem that sounds alarmingly like a breaking bone. You spin staff raised to find a colossal scorpion the size of a medium dog skittering toward you, pincers spread wide. Its glossy exoskeleton catches the sun reflecting shards of golden light. You press your tongue against the roof of your mouth, recalling the lore some scorpions carried venom potent enough to paralyze large mammals. Whether any prehistoric scorpion's venom could fell a human outright remains disputed. But you don't intend to test the theory. You hold your ground staff poised. The creature halts tail, twitching. You raise a leather flask and toss a handful of dried camel hair into the water at its feet. It's said to scent the air with an aroma scorpions detest. The beast recoils, slightly hind legs brushing the marsh mud as it swivels, then retreats into the tangle. Joke 3. Guess it's not a fan of home-cooked spice mixes. Your heart settles into a steady beat as you continue leading your group to firmer ground. The reeds thin, giving way to gravelly sand, and the chirping chorus of birds replaces the scorpion's rasping chorus. You pause at an acacia tree, its gnarled roots providing welcome shade. As you squat to fill the jug with clearer water, you spot a dozen empty exoskeletons clinging to lower branches, the discarded husks of molted scorpions. You pocket one, its translucent shell a brittle memento of survival. A mainstream fact surfaces scorpions, even prehistoric giants, periodically shed their exoskeletons to grow, leaving behind perfect replicas of their former shape. Historians still argue whether molting sites served as communal landmarks for scavengers to avoid, but these clusters signal a fertile breeding ground. You tuck the husk into your belt pouch, a curious trophy, and a warning. With the worst behind you, you guide your companions up a sandy ridge toward open desert. The sun beats down shadows receding as the marsh's boundaries fade. You pause, letting the breeze dry the sweat on your brow and carrying away the faint tang of chitin. Ahead lies the next leg of your journey, sun-scorched rock passes, or perhaps the infamous salt flats. But for now, you've outwitted a sea of scorpions leading the living past the deadliest corners of the marsh. You stand and stretch boots shedding mud and take one last look at the reeds, swaying in the breeze, hiding their legions once more. The oasis glitters behind you, a shimmering mirage, now safe mostly. You tuck your staff into the sand and lift the jug to your lips, savoring each cool drop. The sting on your tongue reminds you that danger lingers in every drop of life. You trudge onto a wind-swept knoll as storm clouds roil like dark seas. Overhead, the air crackling with static and the scent of ozone. Your boots squelch in sodden grass, the ground already soaked by a sudden deluge, and you grip your wooden staff for balance against a rising gale. Today, you bear witness to one of nature's rarest prehistoric horrors. A lightning strike so fierce that it felled an entire herd at once, leaving charred silhouettes against the blackened earth. A mainstream historical fact. Lightning is a natural electrical discharge that can reach temperatures of around 30,000 kelvins, 5 times hotter than the surface of the sun, and prehistoric landscapes with their tall conifers and open herds would have been prime lightning conductors. Historians still argue whether early mammals sought shelter under rock overhangs or huddled in shallow burrows to evade storms, but fossil beds littered with simultaneous burn marks suggest some found no refuge in time. A sudden flash rips the sky brighter than 1,000 suns, and you duck instinctively, heart hammering. The thunder's growl follows a heartbeat later, shaking your ribs like an angry giant. You peer through rain-driven lashes to see blackened stumps of petrified tree trunks, where once mighty conifers stood. Joke one, I always thought tremendous workouts were my thing, didn't expect trees to do electric yoga. Walking gingerly among the skeletal trunks, you find the first pair of fossilized footprints, cloven hooves, frozen mid-stride in charred soil. Beneath them lie 3 charred skeletons of early deer-like creatures, their backs arched as if startled by an unseen predator. You kneel and trace a hoof with your fingertip, feeling the heat-hardened ash crack beneath your glove. Fringe lore claims ancient shamans revered lightning-struck animals as divine messengers, harvesting their burn-smoothed bones for ritual wands. Whether those wands ever sparked miracles or simply looked dramatic around campfires remains a point of mystical debate. The storm rumbles on, and you advance toward a shallow pond shimmering with reflected flashes. In its center floats a ring of blackened bodies, entire families of amphibians and small reptiles, their scales and skins vaporized, leaving only bleached bones. You wince at the smell of scorched flesh trapped in peat. A mainstream fact emerges. Water can conduct electricity, turning ponds into lethal death traps for creatures seeking safety. Historians still argue whether prehistoric animals instinctively avoided water during storms, or simply couldn't sense oncoming strikes. But these pond fatalities tell a shocking tale. You reach into your satchel and pull out a fragment of petrified antler, a keepsake from the earlier lightning strike site. You fit it against the pond's edge, measuring the arc where electricity lanced through water. Joke 2. I always wanted a splash of drama in my life. This is more like a tidal wave of drama. The air seethes with heat as another forked bolt cracks the sky. You count 3 simultaneous strikes zigzagging across the plain, each sending geysers of mud and water skyward. The ground around you hisses steam, billowing up like miniature volcanoes. You step back, staff raised and shelter, under a nearby rock outcrop, rain beating on the stone's surface in glittering droplets. A fringed tidbit surfaces. Some tribes believe that licking lightning-scorched stones could transfer divine power, granting temporary strength or prophetic visions, though many ended up tasting charcoal and regret. You sniff the air and think twice before sampling any mystical stones. Historians still argue whether these rituals predated formal religious institutions or emerged in parallel with shamanic traditions. But either way, they speak to humanity's fascination with harnessing nature's might. The storm's fury abates, and you emerge from your refuge into a landscape transformed. Everywhere you look, bones lie scattered like confetti deer antlers, snapped in half lizard ribs splayed, and turtle shells cracked by exploding brine. You bend to pick up a charred femur, its marrow baked to a honeycomb pattern. Modern asides drift. Imagine EMTs scrambling with defibrillators while you rummage through buffalo rib cages, clear protocols, clean gloves, none of this smoky char. Yet here, your only tools are gloves and wonder. You walk toward the horizon where a lone bison carcass stands like a sentinel, its hide seared to leather and horns twisted from the heat. You kneel, brushing ash off its horn to reveal growth rings. The bison's empty eye socket stares into eternity. Joke 3. I heard bison roam stampedes, didn't realize they also host lightning parties. A mainstream fact reminds you that lightning-caused forest fires have shaped ecosystems by clearing undergrowth and encouraging new growth. Historians still argue whether prehistoric megafires triggered by lightning played a larger role in habitat turnover than volcanic eruptions. But whichever the case, life and death danced hand in hand under these storms. You rise, the bison's horn tucked under your arm as a grim trophy, and gaze at storm-scarred trees swaying in a gentle breeze now. The sky lightens to pewter, and the final rumbles fade. Grass pushes through ash, and tiny shoots of green return hope to the blackened plain. You head back along the hoof prints and pond, marking each site with charcoal crosses to guide future travelers away from electric danger. Each cross holds the memory of a life cut short in an instant, ungainly but necessary warnings etched into the earth. As you trudge toward shelter, you taste the thunder's aftershock on your tongue, metallic and sharp. The storm's legacy lingers in the charred remains of beasts and the promise of new life rising from devastation. You smile through soot-streaked cheeks, knowing that lightning's fury, though indiscriminate, paints a story in stone and bone for those brave enough to read it. You stand beneath an ancient canopy so thick that twilight clings to the forest floor shafts of green light, dimming with each step into the primeval gloom. The air is heavy, oppressively so, with the musty scent of decaying wood and damp moss. As a carboniferous forest guide, you've seen hunger pangs and predator ambushes, but nothing prepares you for the silent scourge crawling through these ferns and horsetails, a fungal plague so pervasive it chokes lungs and stills life in its path. A mainstream fact during the late Carboniferous, fungal diversity exploded alongside vast swamp forests, and some species likely released airborne spores in quantities sufficient to trigger respiratory distress among vertebrates. Historians still argue whether these prehistoric fungi formed massive spore clouds akin to modern molds, or if they remained confined to decaying logs. But fossil lung imprints speak of widespread bronchial distress. Your boots sink slightly as you trudge across the spongy ground, each step releasing microscopic spores that swirl around your ankles like mist. You steady your breath, raising a hand to your face, though a folded cloth offers little protection. Fringe lore murmurs that some shamans, if the term can apply in prehistory, wove masks from linden bark, believing its bitter oils could neutralize spores when inhaled. Whether these masks preserved lung function or simply smelled better than mildew remains clouded in mystery. You tuck a scrap of linden bark into your tunic pocket, tasting hope's faint bitterness on your tongue. The undergrowth trembles as a herd of amphibian behemoths, primitive temnospondylus, emerges into view, their scaly hides mottled with gray patches, telltale signs of spore-induced lesions. They breathe raggedly, each exhale a puff of white spores that drapes the next leaf in ghostly frost. You swallow hard, talk about misty mornings. This one's got a cough. Joke one surfaces in your mind. You approach cautiously, hand outstretched fingers, brushing a swollen nodule on a beast's flank. Beneath your touch it quivers, head-lolling gills flaring for each desperate gulp. You peer into its glassy eyes and feel a pang of sorrow. No primitive trachea or gill slit can keep out these fungal invaders. A mainstream fact emerges: some modern fungal infections, like histoplasmosis, mimic these ancient scourges by thriving on decaying vegetation and releasing spores that invade lungs. Historians still debate whether carboniferous fungi had comparable virulence, but the parallel sends a shiver through your spine. You press a finger to your nose, tasting damp earth and decay. A faint itch curls in your throat as spores drift in. A fringe whisper suggests that tribesfolk burned patches of resinous pine to produce aromatic smoke, thought to clear the air. Whether it did anything beyond induce sneezing fits remains up for debate. You pinch your nose and continue noting how the forest floor pulses with fungi puff balls the size of turnips. Their interiors a cloud of spores at the slightest touch. Ahead, a clearing reveals a ring of colossal mushroom stalks as tall as storybook towers, caps unfurling like parasols. Their gills weep, dark fluid staining the ground in spilled ink. You can't resist a closer look. Kneeling, you tap one cap with your staff, sending a torrent of spores cascading like powdered snow. Joke 2. Snow much for winter wonderlands. Welcome to the fungus tundra. A splash of movement catches your eye, a juvenile para-reptile stumbling through spore-laden air, its scales matte with powder. It coughs, body trembling, and collapses near your foot. You rinse your hands in a nearby rivulet, tasting brine and spores on your fingertips. You gather a handful of the mushroom's dark fluid in a wooden vial, hoping to analyze its potency later. A mainstream fact insists that some prehistoric fungi formed mutualistic networks with plant roots, while others turned parasitic. Historians still argue whether these colossal mushrooms were allies of the forest or silent assassins. But either way, their spores prove deadly. You rise and head deeper into the grove torchlight despite the day's gloom, the flame sputtering as damp air presses around it. Each puff of the torch sends ghosts of spores swirling, illuminating their dance in flickering amber. Fringe lore murmurs of spore saints heroes who inhaled the clouds and emerged chilled by hallucinations, returning with prophetic visions. Whether any seer survived the ordeal or expired in delirium remains disputed, but the tales echo through countless stone carvings. Your foot catches on a fungal root, and you skid forward, ramming into a group of fan-shaped fungi whose spores erupt like miniature explosions. You cough, spittle spraying, and pat your chest. Well, that's one way to add sparkle to my day, you mutter. Joke 3 flits through the haze of spores. Navigating by memory, you emerge from the fungal grove onto sunlit bracken spores, clinging to your tunic like ash. The wind carries them away, replaced by the sweet scent of pine resin. You pause at a rocky outcrop, pulling the linden bark mask from your pocket and wrapping it around your face. The bitter aroma tickles your nostrils, and you inhale deeply, tasting its oily relief. A mainstream fact reminds you that linden and other aromatic barks contain terpenes with antifungal properties. Historians still argue whether prehistoric peoples recognized these compounds' medicinal value or simply stumbled upon them by trial and error. But either way, the scent brings comfort. You unroll the wooden vial, peering at its dark contents. The spores swirl like galaxies trapped in amber. You cork it tight, shaking off excess fluid that beads on your fingers like black pearls. You tuck the vial alongside the antler and tibia in your satchel, a grim but invaluable collection of fungal foes. The forest's edge beckons the threat of spores fading with each step into clearer air. You look back, the fungal towers receding, their spores drifting until they vanish in midday light. The amphibian carcasses lie silent, now testament to spores' silent spread. With careful footing, you leave the clearing behind, lungs rattling, but intact, carrying the tale of a world where tiny spores waged war on the mighty. You emerge onto firmer ground, dry grasses waving in the breeze, sunlight warming your back. The fungal plague recedes, yet leaves its mark on every leaf and lung. As you trudge toward camp, you sheath your torch and breathe in deep, tasting earth resin and relief. The spores may linger, but for now, you stand unbowed, another survivor of Prehistoric's deadliest air raid. You wade into the marsh's shallow edge, waterlogged boots squelching in the silty gloom as dawn's pale light filters through reed stalks. Beneath the murky surface, the ground feels oddly soft and treacherous, a deceptive quick-silt plain where each step threatens to become your last. Here you serve as a guide for weary travelers charting these bogs, and your task is clear: navigate the shifting mud and rescue those who slip into this silent trap. A mainstream historical fact, quick-silt composed of fine clay and organic matter forms in stagnant waters and can behave like a liquid under pressure, trapping humans and animals alike. Early accounts describe countless beasts lost when they ventured too far from firmer ground. Historians still argue whether quick-silt beds ever stretched for miles or were confined to small hollows. But local lore and occasional skeletal remains confirm their lethal potential. You step forward, staff planted firmly before you, but the ground lets go. Your calf sinks to the knee, sucking at leather until the boot bulges. Your heart flutters. You shift weight onto the staff arms, trembling as the mud climbs higher. Joke one, I always wanted to make a mark in history. Didn't think it'd be in mud. With a slow, careful motion, you draw your other boot free and lean back, using your staff's hook to steady yourself. You scan for a firmer patch, a cluster of tussock grass where reedy roots bind the silt. Fringe lore suggests placing woven mats of rushes across quick-silt to distribute weight, but few travelers bother to carry such cumbersome gear. Whether mats truly prevented sinkage or simply floated away in floods remains disputed. You stride to the tussock and lower your foot, gingerly grit crunching under your sole. Ahead, you spot struggling figures, a young ox herder tipped into the mire up to his waist, arms flailing, eyes wide with terror. You swallow, brace your back, and kneel on the grass tuft, extending the staff. He grasps it face pale, and you lean back with all your might, pulling him free inch by inch until he sloshes onto solid ground. The silt slurps behind him like a living creature. You pat his shoulder, letting the adrenaline ebb. The herder gasps, tasting wet silt in relief. You hand him a cloth to wipe his face and crack a wry grin. Joke 2. Well, that was the world's stickiest hug. Pressing onward, you guide your party across a narrowing path. A chorus of croaking frogs rises from submerged reeds, a warning chorus you heed attentively. Suddenly, a soft pop under the next traveler's foot heralds a new trap. You grab her by the arm, yanking her back as she plunges in past the knee. You pivot, hook your staff under her belt, and heave, the two of you leaning back until her foot finds firmer earth. She staggers, wide-eyed mud dripping from her cloak. A mainstream fact, ancient artisans sometimes built primitive walkways of woven branches, corduroy roads to cross such bogs. But evidence of their use in remote marshlands is scant. Historians still argue whether these plank roads were widespread technological solutions or rare local innovations. You pause at a tumble of blackened logs, remnants of a collapsed boardwalk, its rails snapped like twigs. You sift through the debris, finding a rotted plank long enough to serve as an improvised bridge. You lay it over the silt, marking each end with a carved arrow in a standing stone nearby to guide future travelers. Fringe rumor maintains that some locals once trained goats to detect quicksilver by their sure-footed steps, leading them safely across in a fuzzy conga line. Whether goats ever actually saved a human from drowning remains anecdotal. But the story persists. Crossing the plank, you feel the silt's pull lessen beneath your weight. Each step resonates with a satisfying thud on the buried support. The croaking fades as you gain firmer ground. The marsh's hungry hush follows behind. You turn, offering the plank to those behind you. A sudden yelp splits the air. You whirl to see a pack horse, hooves swallowed to the fetlocks, distressed neigh escaping its muzzle. You sprint back, staff at the ready, and wedge the plank under its flank. The horse shies shuddering, but you hold firm, urging it to lean onto firmer turf. The plank creaks beneath its weight, and with a heave, the horse frees a hoof, then another, until it distances itself. Its eyes shine with gratitude as it tosses its head. Joke 3, hoofbeats or heartbeats. It's hard to tell out here. You gather your party at the marsh's fringe, where a ribbon of clear stream winds between grassy banks. You lay the plank against the bank so they can climb out. Each traveler pauses, gazing back at the marsh's deceptive calm, and some touch the grass as if thanking it for its sturdiness. A mainstream fact surfaces as late as the medieval period. Travelers sometimes hired professional bog trotters guides, adept at reading subtle ground cues to lead them safely across wetlands. Historians still argue whether these guides were regarded as essential experts or superstitious charlatans, but their survival rate suggests the former. You collect the plank heavy in your arms and tie it atop your pack while the group splashes in the stream, washing mud from boots and legs. You squat by the water's edge, cupping fingers to drink tasting minerals and fresh rock. The marsh's grip fades with each sip. Stepping back onto solid ground, you scan for more danger signs, normal grass transitioning to spongy moss reeds, giving way to open mud pools. You mark the route with arrowed stones at intervals each, a silent sentinel pointing the way. The marsh recedes behind you, its quick silt plains shrinking into the distance. Ahead, A ridge of hills catches the sunlight your path toward higher ground and new challenges. You pocket the goat hair anklet from your kit, imagining its fluffy resilience against mud. Each saved soul, each carved stone, and every makeshift bridge build a story of survival and human ingenuity. Against the earth's treacherous tricks, you hoist your staff and lead the travelers upward, leaving behind the quicksilt's hungry pull. The marsh's chorus fades, replaced by the rustle of hillside grasses. You exhale boots clinking on pebbles and taste freedom on your tongue, knowing full well that one misstep in the plains below meant an inescapable grave. You crest a low coral reef at dawn's first light, the seabed awash in emerald green luminescence as mats of algae cling to every crevice. Your diving bell's hatch opens with a hiss, and you lower yourself into warm, brackish water that glimmers like a toxic soup. As a reef surveyor, your job is to gauge the reef's health. But today, you find yourself amid a silent apocalypse where anoxia has turned vibrant coral gardens into ghostly barrens. A mainstream fact throughout the Paleozoic and Mesozoic eras, large algal blooms often triggered by nutrient influx from inland erosion could deplete oceanic oxygen levels, creating dead zones where marine life suffocated and sediments preserved mass mortality events. Historians still argue whether these prehistoric anoxic events were global crises tied to mass extinctions or localized phenomena exacerbated by shifting sea levels, but the fossil record of stifled reefs speaks volumes. You drift over once thriving coral heads now blanketed in filamentous green muck. The stench of decaying marine life wafts upward, a faint, sickly sweetness that clings to your wetsuit. You murmur to yourself, "Joke one, I always said reef diving was an immersive experience. Didn't expect the immersive part to be a chokehold." Fish lie belly up on the sandy floor, their gills flared wide in final futile gasps. You kick gently to avoid stirring up silt, each flipper stroke sending tiny puffs of algae into the water. Fringe lore whispers that ancient mariners identified doom-laden shoals by observing the eerie green glow and fled before stench overwhelmed them. Whether any crew survived such hasty retreats or simply ran aground remains debated among maritime archaeologists. You rub your brow under your mask. Survival probably depended on having a good compass more than a good nose. You reach for your sampling tube and collect a vial of water from just above the seabed. It's thick with nutrient-laden sludge, turning your fingertips murky. A mainstream fact surfaces modern dead zones like those in the Black Sea or Gulf of Mexico mirror ancient patterns where eutrophication sparked runaway algal growth leading to oxygen depletion. Scientists still argue whether prehistoric blooms were driven by volcanic input or massive plant decay, but either way, they turned reefs into underwater deserts. Above you, a lone moray eel slithers through skeletal coral skeletons, its skin mottled in rusty brown and teal. You regard it with a mixture of pity and fascination, its resilience both admirable and heartbreaking. Joke 2. Talk about a tough crowd. This eel's got the best seat in the house, though the show's been canceled. The water column feels eerily still, no squawk of gulls or distant whale song, only the silent hiss of bubbles from your regulator. You hover beside a broken broomstick sponge splintered by weightless collapse, its porous body coated in slimy green film. You trace a finger along its shape, recalling fringe reports that prehistoric sponges sometimes harbored symbiotic algae, which burst forth during blooms. Scholars still debate whether these partnerships aided sponge survival or doomed them along with corals. Here, both sponge and coral lie equally betrayed. A flicker of motion catches your eye. A small school of juvenile fish darts through a slight current, their scales shimmering silver. They navigate pockets of slightly higher oxygen, weaving between coral struts like hopeful dancers in a closing theater. You follow them, heart tightening, and notice one gulp for air near the surface, as if seeking refuge. The image lingers, life's tenacity pitted against an unbreathable sea. You adjust your recording device and log oxygen readings near zero at mid-depth, barely tolerable near the surface. The low hum of the gauge fills your ears as you note coordinates for future rescue attempts. Modern asides drift. Imagine OSHA listing underwater hazard zones and posting danger, no breathable water signs, complete with reflective lights. But here, your gauge and gut instincts are all the warnings you get. You fin toward a cluster of delicate fan corals that once glowed violet in healthy waters. Their branches now droop, their tips blackening like cut flowers. You pluck a small fragment and tuck it into your waterproof case. A mainstream fact: coral fragments from anoxic beds can show growth rings that record daily oxygen fluctuations, offering climate insights. Paleobiologists still argue whether these bands reflect seasonal blooms or catastrophic events. But each ring is a diary page of ancient seas. Your suit's dry fabric feels heavy with moisture as you ascend to the surface. Breaking through the algal scum, you gasp for air, literal gulping after hours beneath the haze. You steady yourself against the diving bell's ladder, the morning sun blinding, but welcome. Joke 3. I always wanted a light breeze, didn't expect it to be a breath of fresh air. Climbing inside, you rinse the corals and sponge fragments in fresh water, watching the green residue swirl away. You analyze your water sample's clarity, murky as treacle. You label each vial, meticulously codifying the reef's final moments. Stepping onto the bell's deck, you survey the horizon patches of open water, shimmer promising pockets where oxygen still persists. You point your team toward these oases for future restoration efforts. Fringe whisper. Some conservationists propose seeding reefs with hardy algae eaters to prevent blooms. Whether such biocontrols would restore balance or spark new ecological nightmares remains a topic of fierce debate. You pack your gear, the weight of the reef's demise pressing on your shoulders. Each sample, each bone-white coral, spike, each gulping fish tells a story of suffocation on an ancient scale. As you descend into the bell for the journey home, you carry with you the silent refrain of the dead reef, a cautionary tale of balance lost and a fragile world gasping for breath. You stand at the edge of a glacier-fed valley, the morning sun glinting off jagged ice fields that loom overhead like a frozen fortress. Meltwater drips in rhythmic pulses from fractured seracs, each rivulet swelling into narrow streams that weave through scrubby pines. As a flood god in the Bronze Age, Your role is to predict when the glacier's ice dams will give way, sending torrents of meltwater surging downriver. And today you sense that moment has come. A mainstream historical fact, during the late Pleistocene and early Holocene glacial meltwater pulses, so-called Yukol Laups, released catastrophic floods of scoured sediments and roaring water, reshaping valleys and depositing boulder fields. Historians still argue whether these outburst floods were gradual releases or sudden dam failures, but their geomorphic footprints endure. Your forearms burn as you haul an iron-bound wooden weir into place, wedging it between smoothed boulders in the narrow channel. Upstream, the water level swells ominously, froth rising like teeth. Fringe lore suggests that elders once lit bonfires on moraines to warm the ice and coax controlled melting. Whether this ritual ever averted floods or simply angered the glacier gods remains disputed. You strike flint twice, sparks flaring, and think better of lighting any fires now. The valley rumbles, a low distant growl that resonates through your chest. You tighten your grip on the weir's rope posture, braced against the oncoming surge. Joke one. They said river crossings could be a splash, didn't expect a full-blown tsunami. The water behind you rises in shifting hues of turquoise and slate, a living prism that reflects fractured ice walls. Suddenly, a section of the ice dam cracks in a thundering roar like a colossal drumbeat, and a wall of water crashes into the channel. Your feet slide on slick stones as the current swells to chest high in seconds. You yank the weir free, then leap sideways onto firmer ground as the flood water sweeps past in a churning rush. Trees along the banks bend under the forest needles stripped, and twigs snapped like matchsticks. You grab a perforated leather bucket from your belt, your sound check, and submerge it into the flow-testing water velocity. The current tugs at your arm knuckles, whitening as you gauge the flood's peak. A mainstream fact emerges: Yukol Laups could reach peak discharges exceeding 10,000 cubic meters per second, dwarfing many modern rivers. Geologists still debate whether single floods carved entire canyons or whether multiple pulses over centuries did the work. But either way, each flood was a cataclysm. With the bucket, you skim a sample of suspended sand and gravel sediment load that can smother fish beds and overwhelm irrigation channels. You tip the contents into a cloth and tie it off to study grain size later. Fringe Wonder says some communities used goats to test receding water levels. If the goats balked at crossing, the flood was fleeing. If they splashed through, more surges were coming. You watch a goat nibble grass beyond the flood's edge unconcerned and laugh quietly, nature's own water gauge. The floodwater roars past, gurgling around you like boiling soup. A massive boulder dislodged by ice tears through the shallows and bores a groove into the riverbed. You leap clear, staff raised, and catch yourself on a mossy outcrop. Joke 2. I always wanted to rock the boat, didn't think I'd be the one doing the rocking. Behind you, the flood crest passes, and water levels recede with surprising speed. Pools remain swirling with sediment, but the main current retreats upriver toward the shattered dam. You wade back into the channel mud, clinging to your leggings, and place wooden markers at 6-foot intervals, chalking them to log how high the water rose. The chalk hisses on wet wood a small but meaningful record. You trudge upstream toward the ice dam's remnants, stepping over shattered blocks that gleam wetly in sunlight. Meltwater cascades through crevasses, carving new channels into blue ice. You pause to admire a serac window, a natural arch carved by persistent flow, then realize it's also a warning of further collapse. Historians still argue whether prehistoric peoples revered glaciers as living deities or feared them as monstrous rivals. But here, the ice's power is unmistakable. Picking your way over brash ice and debris, you find a sheltered ledge overlooking the breach. From this vantage, you see where the flood's energy gouged the valley walls, leaving sheer scars in limestone and depositing humps of gravel hundreds of feet beyond the normal channel. You pull a piece of charcoal from your pouch and sketch a quick map in the soft mud annotation for your fellow guides and future excavators. A falcon circles overhead, its keen eyes scanning for dislodged fish caught in shallow eddies, nature's opportunist finding fortune in disaster. You watch it dive for a silver flash and emerge clutching a trout talons glinting. The bird's triumph offers a flicker of life amid devastation. Joke 3. Even the birds get a front row seat to the river's wild side. Splotches of grass are flattened in waves where water receded. You bend to touch a nearest tuft, noting it shook loose only now. You place a finger in the old water line. Mud under your nail tells of fine silt deposition. These clues will help you predict erosion rates and plan for future flood defenses. As you descend back toward the valley floor, you retrieve your sample cloth and sketch map, securing them in your pack. The sun has climbed fully, drying rime on the rocks. The flood's roar has become a distant whisper, and the valley's pulse returns to a gentle murmur. You survey the new landscape, scoured banks, piled debris, and newly carved channels, and feel both awe and relief. The flood tested your vigilance and preserved your skill, each marker, each sample a testament to survival and adaptation in a world shaped by ice. You trudge back to camp along a trail marked by broken branches and clearing, staff tapping in time. As you approach the homestead, a child runs to greet you, eyes wide at the scars in the land. You kneel, handing over a flake of charcoal and pointing to your map. Knowledge shared is safety multiplied. You heft your pack heavier with data than stones breathing deep, crisp post-flood air. The glacier's roar has quieted, at least for now, but you know its patience is as enduring as the ice itself. Tomorrow, you'll measure sediment layers or reinforce weir lines, but today you carry the flood's memory etched in mud and bone. You slip into a shallow coastal cove where the water's hue shifts from sapphire to sickly chartreuse algae blooms, smothering the shallows like a fluorescent carpet. Your leather sandals slosh through masses of slimy filaments that cling to toes and drift in endless eddies. As a shoreline inspector, your mission is grim. Document the coruscating tide of toxic algae that has turned tranquil lagoons into stinking death traps. A mainstream historical fact throughout the Mesozoic and into the Cenozoic nutrient-rich runoff, often from upwelling currents or decaying shore vegetation, could trigger explosive algal growth leading to red tides or green scums that deplete oxygen and release biotoxins. Historians still argue whether prehistoric blooms caused mass die-offs in coastal ecosystems globally or remained localized phenomena. But the fossil record shows beach-stranded fish in apocalyptic numbers. You peer over the murky waterline and spot carcasses bobbing like inverted boats, schools of herring, smaller bony fish, and even a few juvenile sea turtles, all immobilized by neurotoxins secreted by dinoflagellates. The stench rises like vinegar and decay curling your nostrils. Fringe lore claims that seafarers once roasted shellfish over driftwood fires to burn off toxins, the smoke supposedly purifying the flesh. Whether any cooked clam ever stopped causing sickness or merely tasted like charcoal remains hotly contested. You pocket a singed mussel shell as a specimen wincing at its blackened scar. Joke 1 drifts through your mind. I always thought beach combing was relaxing. Didn't expect the ocean to cough up its guts. You kneel and dip a wooden ladle beneath the surface, drawing water that sloshes green and viscous. You taste post a drop on your tongue, researcher's impulse, immediately wincing as bitter algal toxins sear your taste buds. You spit, scald it, and wipe your mouth on a rag. A mainstream fact surfaces saxitoxin and brevetoxin biotoxins produced by certain phytoplankton can paralyze marine life within minutes and cause severe respiratory distress in humans. Paleontologists still debate whether extinct marine reptiles succumbed to the same toxins. But studies of sedimentary biomarkers suggest algal assemblies have produced toxins for hundreds of millions of years. Wading farther, you note patterns in the bloom's edge, eddies of clear water encircle small promontories where currents swirl clean. You guide a battered fishing skiff into one such micro-lagoon, its hull scraping through slick mats. A fringed detail whispers that beach folk once diverted freshwater springs to flush scum into deeper seas, a primitive sewer tactic whose success varied. Whether the freshwater simply carried toxins offshore or diluted them into a broader dead zone remains a matter of aquatic archaeologists' debate. You disembark and haul a rod and reel contraption, your makeshift plankton sampler, into the bloom. Twisting the crank, you draw up a mesh cup of motile cells that thrash like microscopic jellyfish. Under your magnifier, each cell sports twin flagella and spines sparkling emeralds under bright daylight. You transfer several to a glass vial for lab analysis, noting cell density readings off the charts. Joke 2. I always wanted a green thumb, didn't realize I'd get it on marine life. A sudden hush falls across the cove as an osprey skims, low talons extended toward a gasping fish in a patch of fresher water. It flutters away empty-clawed when the fish slips between blooms nature's own toxin test. You watch the bird circle, then perch on a standing dead tree, feathers ruffled against the wind. A mainstream fact reminds you that heavy metal runoff or volcanic ash can fertilize ancient seas, sparking plankton booms that shifted food webs. Historians still argue whether such events drove marine extinctions in the deep past or served as mere blips. But either way, the consequences for shore communities were dire. You trudge along the algae-choked shoreline boots, leaving greasy footprints. You spot small crustaceans, amphipods, and shrimp struggling in shallow pockets, their exoskeletons glazed with algae slime. You scoop a handful into a petri dish, watching them quiver before succumbing. A fringe rumor holds that shamans collected silver shrimp washed ashore as omens of impending famine, using their dried shells as luck charms. Whether those charms availed any harvest remains unverified but widely repeated in coastal myths. The cove's shallow gradient reveals a gentle slope of fishless flats, so you place wooden stakes at regular intervals, tying survey lines to measure bloom thickness. Each thicker knot marks zones where oxygen plummets to zero. You record coordinates by scratch-cutting notches into driftwood posts, your field journal in living timber. Joke 3, Diary of a Wimpy Beach Day. 42 still, no fish. You pause to catch your breath, the swirl of algae brushing your calves like living scarves. The sun, climbing higher, transforms the bloom into a shimmering mosaic that dazzles your mask, beautiful and deadly. You dip your gloved hand into a clear pool, scooping fish guts, detritus, and silt for nutrient analysis, mindful of cross-contamination. A mainstream fact surfaces modern scientists track fossilized organic biomarkers like alkanones to reconstruct ancient blooms, but sedimentary chemistry from prehistoric strata suggests blooms have waxed and waned with global climate shifts. Debates continue over whether dinosaurs contributed to nutrient cycling in shallow seas that fed blooms. You haul your skiff to a dry spot and unload samples, arranging vials of plankton water and detritus alongside fish carcasses spaced like grisly mile markers. Your team takes tissue swabs from the turtles, preserving proteins that might reveal ancient toxin tolerance. A fringe tidbit whispers that some ancient turtles evolved toxin-resistant enzymes, enabling them to graze blooms with impunity, an evolutionary arms race still being unraveled in genetic sequences. As the tide shifts, patches of algal scum peel back with the retreating water, revealing burial mounds of entwined shells and bones. You gather a few oyster shells glistening with toxin residue for spectrographic analysis. Each sample is a piece of the bloom story. How nutrients fed onshore plankton, how coastal ecosystems collapsed, and how survivors adapted or perished. Walking away from the cove, you survey the bloom's receding edge, a scalloped moat between poisoned shallows and livelier open sea. You gather driftwood and compose a warning sign, carved symbols of fish and toxic spirals legible to any traveler. The green tide laps at your ankles one last time, a reminder that beauty and peril can merge beneath the water's surface. You load your boat, striking off the shore where blooms thin in the current sweep. Your path home follows cleaner waters, but the taste of brackish rot lingers on your lips. Each sample in your kit, the plankton, fish, turtle shells, is a testament to the bloom's lethal power and the ancient cycles that mirror today's coastal crises. As you leave the cove behind, the algal mats churn lazily in the breeze, stretching toward hidden inlets. You squint at their phosphorescent sheen, knowing you carry the memory and the data of another prehistoric death marked by quiet suffocation in nature's own neon trap. You trudge up a low ridge overlooking a reedy plain, the air smelling faintly of rotten eggs and stale marsh gas. In your hand, you clutch a siphon bottle to collect bubbling methane from a fissure in the clay soil, a warning sign of ancient decaying vegetation deep underground. As a field geochemist, your job is to measure gas fluxes. Today, you witness a prehistoric methane explosion so vast it had the force to lay forests low in a single roar. A mainstream fact: clathrate hydrates methane trapped in ice-like structures beneath sediments, can destabilize when warmed or depressurized, releasing vast gas volumes that can ignite spontaneously. Historians still argue whether past warming events triggered runaway methane releases, contributing to rapid climate shifts, but evidence from Paleolake beds suggests at least localized catastrophic outgassing. You kneel beside the fissure, noticing flecks of orange pyrite glinting in damp clay. You lower the bottle's tube into the vent, capturing a fizzing plume. The gas crackles as you squeeze the bulb, and you inhale lightly to detect its composition, no small risk. Fringe lore insists that shamans once carried damp moss to seal methane vents, believing the green fluff suffocated the fire devil. Whether any moss truly stifled the gas or merely sparked more curiosity remains a matter of ethno-geological debate. You pocket a tuft of moss anyway, mystery trumps logic in these parts. Without warning, the ground vibrates with a low rumble like distant thunder, yet the sky is clear. You straighten, heart-pounding, and glance back at the fissure bubbles, surge larger, coalescing into a vast geyser of pale blue flame that rises 10 feet before collapsing in a smoky hiss. Joke 1, I always wanted a BBQ pit. Didn't expect it to be powered by prehistoric peat. The blast pushes you sideways with a gust of heat. You stagger, kit rattling against your side. You grip a nearby alder sapling to steady yourself as the aftershock reverberates through the ridge. Behind you, a grove of young pines snaps and splinters as if struck by a giant's fist, needles raining crimson on the scorched earth. You taste soot and singed bark on the wind. Recovering, you scan the panorama. A scarred circle of charred stumps marks where the methane cloud detonated, flattening vegetation in a precise radial pattern. At the center, the fissure glows faintly, still venting unburned gas. A mainstream fact surfaces modern studies of submarine methane seeps reveal similar low-temperature explosions capable of fracturing seafloor strata. Geologists still debate whether ancient clathrate releases triggered mass extinctions or remain too localized. But this scorched circle proves that even terrestrial vents can unleash sudden fury. You kneel at the perimeter, brushing ash aside to reveal a flattened bed of horsetail stems and ferns, their tissue carbonized, but imprint preserved like botanical negatives. You press a fern frond into a field notebook, capturing its silhouette. Fringe rumor claims that early tribes carved warning signs in wood glyphs of flame and skull where methane fires occurred. Whether any legend survived the blast zones or was effaced by fire remains uncertain, but you sketch a simple flame icon beside your notes. As you move around the circle, you discover small glassy beads, melted silica formed by the blast's heat. You collect one in a leather pouch, its surface pitted and iridescent like a drop of oil. Joke 2. I always thought hot topics were conversations didn't expect actual molten rock. The air smells stale, now tinged with ozone and charred pine. You switch on a portable flame ionization detector. Readings spike off the charts within the blast radius, confirming high methane concentrations. A mainstream fact reminds you that methane is nearly 25 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide over a century-long time frame. Climatologists still argue whether ancient methane pulses drove abrupt warming, but every sample you collect helps unravel Earth's ancient thermostat. You ascend the ridge, gently marking burned trees with charcoal arrows to map the blast's reach. Beyond the blackened zone, lush green returns in waves, an emerald promise after destruction. You pause at the edge, inhaling fresh air and savoring the contrast. A distant crow call echoes as you descend. At the bottom, sheep graze warily on regrowth nibbling singed grasses. You kneel to taste a blade, earthy, tinged with charcoal, then spit eyes watering. Joke 3, I wanted to taste terroir, didn't guess it'd be smoked ember edition. Climbing back to your equipment, you pack the siphon bottle moss sample fern imprint and melt bead into foam-lined compartments. Each artifact tells part of the explosion, story, gas origin, burn temperature, and botanical aftermath. You turn for one last look at the scarred plain rimmed with living forest beyond the blast circle. The sun dips behind distant hills, gilding the smoke plume in rose gold. You pocket your field notebook, its pages filled with data that bridge past and present. As you trudge toward camp, the memory of heat and flame mingles with your steady heartbeat. You carry the evidence of a sudden prehistoric death, where buried methane rose in a lethal cloud of fire and sound and echo of Earth's hidden power. You shouldered more than gear on this ridge. You bore witness to a moment when the very ground betrayed life in a flash. Now you descend into dusk, stepping carefully, mindful that beneath your boots the earth still breathes gas, and that next time the silent killer might catch you unawares. You trudge through humid jungle undergrowth, the canopy above a living mosaic of emerald and jade, until you reach the rim of a mirror-still lake nestled in a volcanic caldera. The water's surface is unnervingly placid, no ripple from wind or animal, while a faint hiss rises from its depths, the silent prelude to a deadly exhalation. As a lake watcher, your role is to detect the invisible threat of carbon dioxide accumulating beneath the water, waiting to pour over the rim and suffocate everything downwind. A mainstream fact, lakes like Lake Nyos in Cameroon experienced catastrophic CO2 outbursts, limnic eruptions, where dissolved gas reached a critical threshold and vented in a sudden column, creating dense clouds that rolled over the land, displacing oxygen. Geologists still argue whether prehistoric equivalents contributed to mass mortalities in surrounding ecosystems or remained rare events. But fish kill layers and sediment cores hint at ancient repeats. You perch on a mossy boulder at the crater's edge, lowering a weighted sampling tube into the cool, syrupy water. The hiss grows louder as bubbles cling to the tube, turning it slick. You draw it up and uncork the glass vial, inhaling a faintly sweet metallic tang. Already your head feels light, as if gravity's grip has lessened, an early warning sign. Fringe lore claims that ancient tribes left offerings of fish entrails at the lake's edge to appease spirits trapped below, hoping to calm the restless gas. Whether the spirits ever heeded these tributes or lured more victims remains hotly debated among archaeologists. A gentle breeze stirs the reeds behind you, carrying a distant rustle of animal calls, birds seeking breakfast, monkeys chirruping. But here, the air near the lake is dense and still pregnant with invisible menace. Joke one springs to mind. I always wanted some bubbly personality, didn't expect it from carbon dioxide. From the sampling tube, you pour a few drops onto a pH strip, its color shifting subtly, an acidic hint of volcanic input. A mainstream fact emerges. CO2 dissolves in water to form carbonic acid-altering lake chemistry, and sometimes enabling limnic buildup. Paleoclimatologists still argue whether prehistoric lake eruptions played a role in local extinctions or were overshadowed by volcanic ash falls. But each pH reading adds another puzzle piece. Suddenly, the lake surface shivers fine tremors radiating outward as if the water hesitates before a gasp. You scramble back, kit-jangling heart in your throat. A singular fizzing crack splits the air as gas bursts from the lake bottom, sending a pale plume skyward. Seconds later, a rolling cloud of CO2 surges over the rim, hugging the ground. The hiss becomes a roar in your ears, then a thunderous whoosh that flattens grass and sends birds diving for cover. You duck behind a stone gas curling around your ankles with the weight of water. Your boots are protected, but the thin mask over your mouth strains against exhalations. You inhale shallowly, must avoid deep breaths. The cloud engulfs a grove of pines. Their needles droop, sap boiling in resinous bubbles. A mainstream fact asserts that CO2 is heavier than air, flowing into low-lying areas and displacing oxygen. Historians still debate whether prehistoric human settlements along crater lakes vanished overnight in such events. But mound burials near ancient calderas suggest tragedies shrouded in silence. Emerging from behind cover, you glimpse paralysis in action. Small mammals, rodents, and amphibians lie motionless. Where they sought refuge, their lungs starved of air. You spot fish floating along the outlet stream surface, bellies up in a final futile gasp. A fringe whisper suggests that survivors stumbled blind into the miasma, guided only by memory and doomed by each breath. Whether any soul ever escaped unscathed remains both miracle and myth. You tap your hood's leather seal and inch forward, measuring CO2 concentration with a handheld detector. Numbers climb off the chart percentages that would kill a human in seconds. You record GPS coordinates, marking where the cloud's density peaks. Joke 2. Talk about a cold one. This is like inhaling a boxing glove. The cloud recedes as quickly as it appeared, thinning under a gentle breeze. Sunlight returns to the crater's rim, illuminating a scene of quiet ruin. You step back to the water's edge, watching a lone water lily float atop a ring of bubbles, nature's fragile reminder of both life and death. The hiss has ended. The lake lies deceptively calm once more. You collect a final sample, water drawn from just beneath the surface, now laden with depleted oxygen and extra gas. A mainstream fact reminds you that diffusive outgassing can persist for days, requiring careful monitoring. Climatologists still argue whether injecting seabed vents with cooler water or installing degassing pipes could have prevented ancient disasters, but modern interventions at Lake Nyos hint at solutions. Gathering your gear, you step onto a patch of grass, mindful of residual gas pooling in depressions. You place flags at intervals downwind marking danger zones. Each flag flaps silently in the regained breeze, warnings for those who come after. Turning away from the crater, you watch the cloud's final wisps dissolve into the sky. The silence is deafening. You pocket a fragment of cooled ash from the crater rim, a souvenir of fire turned to stone. You breathe deep, tasting clean air, each inhalation a small victory. As you trudge back through the jungle canopy, the hiss echoes faintly in your mind, a reminder that the earth can exhale death without warning. You carry the date of the ash and the memory of a prehistoric lake's lethal sigh, leaving the crater's stillness behind as both witness and herald of nature's hidden depths. You trudge across a windswept tundra as gray dawnlight fractures on frost-hazed grasses, each blade encased in delicate ice like frozen lace. The air snaps at your lungs with crystalline bite, yet the true peril lies beneath your boots, a layer of permafrost so volatile that a sudden temperature plunge can turn living flesh to living statues in moments. Today, you witness a prehistoric freeze so abrupt it locked creatures mid-motion in eternally frozen tableau. A mainstream historical fact, permafrost forms where ground temperatures remain below freezing for 2 or more consecutive years, preserving organic remains by inhibiting microbial decay. Scientists still argue whether sudden paleoclimate reversals could plunge regions into near-instant frost or required prolonged cold spells. But ice core records hint at past events too swift for gradual adaptation. You steady your breath fog swirling in front of your face and test the air with a C-clamp thermometer. Its metal prongs plunge into the moss, reading an impossible -45 degrees Celsius. Fringe lore suggests that shamans carried pouches of warm coals to ward off the ice spirits thought to roam when the land shivered. Whether the coals ever protected skin or merely warmed the shaman's hands remains a subject of anthropological debate. You slip a coal ember into your pocket, hope flickering in frozen darkness. Ahead, the grass ends at a shallow creek whose surface gleams like spun glass. A family of giant beaver-like creatures, a genus the size of small cars, stood drinking here mere moments ago, you recall. Now they lie sculpted mid-drink muzzles, frozen against the water fur, stiff as bristles. You kneel, pressing gloved fingers to an ear. The brittle flesh cracks under your touch. Joke one springs to your lips. I always wanted to be caught off guard. Didn't expect it'd be iced like a cake. You step over them onto the creek's ice, careful to test its thickness with your staff. Each tap echoes hollowly. Beneath the translucent layer, you spot a salamander-like amphibian splayed in eternal swim-body curve, gills flared. You lower a glass vial to collect a sliver of ice around it, hoping to study cellular preservation later. A mainstream fact emerges: rapid freezing can trap water in cells as amorphous glass, preventing ice crystal damage. Biologists still argue whether any vertebrate could survive such cryopreservation naturally. But these fossils suggest nature approximates laboratory vitrification. A sudden whisper of wind sends a swirl of diamond dust snow across the plain. You brace against the gust eyes watering and realize the wind chill has plunged another 10 degrees in seconds. Your breath fogs in dense clouds that hang like phantoms around your head. Fringe rumor claims early explorers left behind whistles fashioned from bone to measure wind speed by pitch change. Whether any bone whistle definitively predicted blizzards or simply shrieked in mockery remains an open question. You whistle softly a single note lost in the gale. At the creek's bend, you find a trio of wolves mid-howl, their muzzles frozen upward in silent lament. Their fur bristles with rime nostrils dusted in frost. You cannot help but shiver. No living thing could howl in this vacuum of warmth. A mainstream fact insists that modern Arctic wolves grow winter pelage to trap air for insulation, but no fur can reclaim heat once the cold snaps viciously. Ecologists still argue whether prehistoric mammals evolved antifreeze proteins in blood, but here the ice offers no mercy. You approach one and place a gloved hand on its flank. Ice fractures in tiny arcs under your palm. The wolf's form is flawless muscles, poised ribs flared a moment, captured in crystalline amber. You tilt its head slightly, revealing amber eyes frozen open, reflecting the bleak sky. You press a small camera lens to the cornea, capturing the hush of death. Joke 2 flits through your numb mind. I always wanted to see the world through wolf's eyes, just didn't want the ice-cold version. Moving on, the creek narrows to a trickle beneath a slender ice bridge. You crawl across, reverently tracing the line where water once flowed freely. On the far bank, a giant salamander the size of a man's thigh lies frozen in a twisting leap. Jaws agape, body coiled. You scoop a handful of the slush beneath its belly, tasting the frozen mineral tang. The slush sparkles in the lens of your flashlight as you collect a sample for isotopic study. A mainstream fact reminds you that isotopic ratios in ice can reveal the temperature at time of formation. Climatologists still debate the resolution of paleo-temperature reconstructions, but each crystal you gather is a microscopic archive. As you rise from the creek, the wind cuts you like shards of glass. You pull your hood close, gripping the cold ember in your palm until it hisses coldly out. The ember cools to ash hope extinguished by reality's chill. You press forward toward firmer ground, each step labored on porcelain tundra. You crest a small rise overlooking the tableau. Dozens of creatures frozen in motion, deer mid-leap, birds mid-flap, insects mid-hover, an entire ecosystem encapsulated in a single bone-chilling event. The sight is both mesmerizing and horrifying. You raise your staff to measure snow depth, marking 5 centimeters added since you arrived mere minutes ago. The frost's rapid advance had forced this sudden freeze, a climatic ambush by winter incarnate. Knee-deep in snowdrifts, you secure reflective markers around the site to guide future teams and prevent lost footsteps. Each reflective ribbon snaps in the wind like a small silver scream. Fringe lore whispers of lost expeditions swallowed by sudden snows, their tracks erased. Whether any survivor returned to tell the tale remains part truth, part myth. As the sun dips low, the temperature climbs imperceptibly. Warmer air stirs the ice, sending tiny fractures across the plain. You count this as a blessing. Thaw returns life to landscapes trapped in freeze. You collect the last samples, ice cores containing microfossils, and pack your kit. You trudge back along your tracks, embers of sunlight warming your face as frost melts from grasses. The frozen forms lie behind you, waiting for eventual thaw and scientific revelation. You exhale, tasting steam, and feel your heartbeat slow to human rhythm again. Each artifact, wolf-eye salamander scales, bone-chilled fur, tells of a death too swift to comprehend, a permafrost so cruel it halted life in a single breath. As you return to camp, your gloves still stiff with ice, you realize that frozen time can be both sanctuary and tomb. You carry the echoes of an instant when warmth betrayed life locked forever in crystalline stillness. You trudge across a barren desert where shifting sands rise like frozen waves, the scorching sun forging dunes that tower overhead, each crest a golden promise and every trough a hidden grave. As a desert nomad's guide, your feet know the subtle give of loose sand, but nothing and no one stays on top for long. Today, you witness the slow, inexorable burial of life beneath desert dunes, where even the mighty can vanish beneath an ocean of sand. A mainstream historical fact, Aeolian processes, wind-driven sand movement, have sculpted vast dune seas throughout Earth's history, burying forests and fossil deposits beneath layers of quartz. Geologists still argue whether rapid dune advancement during dry spells could overtop trees within months or required years, but paleobotanical pockets show entire groves entombed in shifting sand. You step carefully along a faint trail, staff in hand, scanning for sun-bleached bone protruding from rippled surfaces. Fringe lore insists desert tribes once painted sandstone pillars with warnings, zigzag lines denoting dune devil's realm. But centuries of sandstorms likely effaced these signs. Whether any traveler heeded them or perished anyway remains a cautionary whisper among caravanners. You sift a handful of sand through your fingers, feeling its silky weight. Ahead, a massive femur emerges, a camel ancestor's bone bleached white and half swallowed by the dune. You kneel and gently brush away grains, revealing knobby joints rounded by time. You pause to reflect. This creature once navigated these plains, seeking water that now lies buried leagues away beneath new dune crests. Joke 1. I always thought bones would last longer. Underground didn't factor in sandpaper for eternity. You stand and survey the dune's flank, noting subtle color bands. Where wind has alternately stripped and deposited sand, each stripe a record of seasonal winds. You trace a line with your staff to mark the bone's location for future excavation. A mainstream fact surfaces many fossil sites are hidden beneath dunes, only to be revealed by storms or erosion. Paleontologists still debate whether systematically scouring desert blowouts yields more finds than chance exposures, but every mapped bone adds to humanity's library of lost life. Rising on the dune's windswept lip, you spot a hollow, where a small grove once stood, charcoal-stained earth amid an expanse of gold. You descend into the basin and find charred fragments of an ancient acacia. its roots preserved in a thin mat of silica. You pry a splinter free, amazed at how heat-fused wood resists abrasion. Fringe rumor says desert dwellers mixed ground char with clay to make sandstone ink for tattoos. Whether these inks endured skin's sands remains a colorful rumor. You tuck the splinter into your kit. The wind gusts, and you stagger as a mini sandstorm kicks up, hurling particles that sting like needles. You pull your hood low and press on, reaching a ridge where a fossilized skull lies half covered. You shine your torch beneath the sun's glare, revealing eye sockets still intact. You note its orientation, skull facing downward as if diving into sand. You capture its image with your field camera, mindful of light reflections, then gently wrap it in linen. A sudden settling hush descends as the storm lulls, and you glimpse a caravan moving like ant shadows along the horizon, dromedaries laden with goods on a salt trade route. Their caravan leader waves, but you cannot call out. Your voice would carry only into the dunes' hungry silence and disappear. Joke 2. I always wanted to catch up to caravans, did not expect sand to be the speed limit. You gather bone fragments, charcoal chips, and sand samples in labeled vials. A mainstream fact reminds you that radiometric dating of quartz grains can reveal burial ages pinpointing when dunes advance. Researchers still argue whether thermoluminescence or OSL, optically stimulated luminescence, yields more accurate dates. But each sample you collect shines a light on ancient chronology. Sun dips toward the west, and shadows stretch like ink spills across ridges. You climb to the dune crest, and with a final look behind, stamp your footprints once more, each step a momentary claim before the wind erases your passage. The dunes await remorseless shapers of landscape and grave. You turn for home, the sand whispering at your heels. Your kit bones, charcoal splinter sand, feels heavier with stories. As you descend the final dune, you taste grit on your lips and carry the desert's hush in your bones, life and death entwined in a sandy embrace where every buried secret waits for the right wind to reveal its tale. You trudge across a windswept desert where dawn's pale light ignites shifting dunes into molten gold, each crest rolling like frozen waves over an expanse of buried secrets. Your leather boots sink into fine quartz sand, sinking knee-deep in places each step, risking silent disappearance. As a desert guide, your skill at reading dune ripples keeps travelers alive, but here an entire herd vanished beneath a silent avalanche of sand, leaving only bleached bones peeking through the crest of a tomb higher than any stone monument. A mainstream fact, wind-blown sand moved by saltation and suspension creates dune fields that can advance at rates up to several meters per year, steadily burying whatever lies in their path. Geologists still argue whether catastrophic dune surges during extreme winds could engulf large animals in days or required persistent storms over months. But fossilized dune-encased skeletons show sudden entombment. You pause at the lip of a wind-scoured depression where a giant camelid skeleton lies splayed as though frozen mid-stride. Its femur juts skyward, a bleached beacon amid the russet sands. You lean on your staff and smile wryly. I always thought camels were desert experts, didn't expect them to lose a race with sand. Fringe lore murmurs that nomads once carved wooden stakes into dunes to anchor spirits and halt sand movement, believing whispering winds would respect the poles. Whether these spirit stakes ever slowed dune migration or merely became landmarks buried in turn remains an ongoing debate among anthropologists. You pull a stake from your pack, a slender cedar rod inscribed with protective runes, and press it into the lee side of the dune, hoping to honor ancient practice. You kneel beside the camelid skull, brushing fine grains away with a soft bristled brush. Beneath your touch, the bone's surface glows like ivory in sunrise. A mainstream fact surfaces bone preservation in arid deserts owes much to minimal moisture and microbial activity. Paleontologists still debate whether chemical weathering from occasional dew or wind-driven erosion poses a greater threat to fossils. But here, the skeleton remains remarkably intact. Beyond the camel's remains, you spot a cluster of smaller bones, lizard rib cages, and rodent jaws anchored in a narrow furrow, carved by last night's gale. You sketch their positions in your notebook, each dot a clue to the burial's speed. Joke 1. I always wanted to go dune surfing. Didn't expect to wipe out on bones. You rise and survey a distant ridge where dunes crest like breakers on a molten sea. There, a group of antelope-like creatures, ancient gazelle kin, must have sought refuge only to be overwhelmed. You lead your party across the firm sand beneath the crest, revealing hoof prints swept away. Except for the fallen, each step forward threatens to erase footprints of both life and guide. You kneel beside a tangled mass of ribs, delicate as picket fence rails, and carefully lift a vertebra. Its centrum is polished smooth by sand-blasting winds. You place it in a padded pouch, then look skyward as a sudden gust whips a whirlwind of grains around you, drenching your cloak in micro-abrasive grit. Joke 2. I always wanted an exfoliation treatment, didn't expect nature's microdermabrasion. A mainstream fact surfaces chronic abrasion by saltating sand grains can round bone edges over millennia, sometimes disguising tool marks or natural fractures. Taphonomists still argue whether wind polishing can obliterate diagnostic features, but detailed microscopy often teases out life's last traces. You scan for surviving vegetation and find a single clump of hardy desert grass valiantly poking through shifting dunes. Its roots, exposed by sand removal, reveal tangled masses clinging to ancient soil. You harvest a few strands as living indicators of former soil surfaces, noting climate shifts in root growth rings. Fringe rumor claims desert plants once hummed when uprooted, warning of spiritual desecration. Whether the hum was real or a byproduct of tensed fibers remains part superstition, part folklore. With the grass and bones collected, you climb to the dune's crest and plant a flag bright saffron cloth tied to your staff, marking this burial site. The cloth flaps in the wind, a banner acknowledging the fallen. You take a final look, a frozen herd, now sand-sculpted ghosts, reaching toward the sky. As the sun climbs, the dunes glow white at their peaks and shadows narrow in the troughs. You guide your party down the dune's leeward slope, each footfall careful to avoid fresh slip faces. You taste the dry air, gritty and parched, reminding you that life here survives only by constant vigilance. You trudge toward a rocky outcrop beyond the dune sea, the bones and grass samples stowed in your pack. Ahead, the promise of firm ground and cool shade beckons. As you descend, you turn for one last glance at the monument of sand and bone, a silent testament to nature's slow but relentless embrace. You steady your staff and lead the way out of the dunes, your footprints already fading behind you. The desert's hush settles around your party, carrying the echoes of those buried beneath its shifting tides. As the sun lingers toward the horizon, its golden rays soften the edges of every dune into undulating waves of mellow shadow and light. You pause on a rocky ledge overlooking the sand sea, the wind now gentle, carrying only whispers of grains rather than roars of burial. Let your breath slow in tandem with the breeze, each inhale drawing cool evening air into your lungs, each exhale releasing the day's echoes of ash and tar plague and quicksilk flame and ice. Feel the warmth of the stone beneath your palm as you settle into the ledge's protective curve, its surface gently radiating heat stored through countless suns. Below, the dunes shimmer like a liquid landscape, each crest a promise of rest rather than peril. Remember the camel's bleached skeleton, the frozen wolf, the charred trees, the suffocating blooms, the roaring floods, the hiss of lake gas, the sting of scorpions, each a chapter in nature's brutal anthology. Now, let these images recede like distant storms, making room for the calm hush of twilight. Let your mind drift across the vast plains, imagining every buried secret gently yielded as a sigh rather than a scream. The one-time clamoring of prehistoric lives now quiet, replaced by the steady pulse of shifting sand, a lullaby older than any song. As darkness softens the world, the first stars appear overhead, their pinpoint light a reminder that even in the vastness you are cradled by time's gentle currents. The desert's hush becomes your companion, a velvet cloak wrapping you in stillness. Rest now in the knowledge that you have borne witness to life's grand tapestry, intricate, violent, beautiful, and lived to share its tales. Close your eyes. Let the desert's exhalation carry you into dreams of wind-swept dunes and silent archives of bone. Good night and sweet dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.